Kristin, you're in LA. Rob, what parts of the US are you in this fine
I'm
afternoon?
about 400 miles north of Mrs. Messerli right now in San Rafael, California, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
San Rafael. There you go. So it I'm in Cleveland as always, but
Rich, I think
with
I mean
negative
you and I
eight
have done
today.
one or two Zoom calls over the years here,
Just
and
in
I
case you
think
didn't
I've
know.
seen what's that?
Just in case you didn't know where I was. So yeah, if the background didn't give it away. So
I think I've. Well, I didn't know if your crew took that
yeah, we
background
take
with
this
you
on the road.
during
Yeah, exactly. The
college game day kind of thing. I think I've seen you not with that background once, and it was I think after a mortgage collaborative event, and you stayed an extra day or two, Miami or someplace, or Fort Lauderdale or Naples or something. I
probably
don't know.
Miami. Yeah, Miami.
I think you were in a cabana.
Sounds great right now.
Anyway,
It's like negative 10 here. I just saw a snowman outside light up a cigarette. That's how cold it is here.
boom, boom. All right, take that
All
act
right.
on the road.
All right, let's go ahead and get into it. This is The Big Picture. I'm Rich Swerbinsky with Onward and Upward Consulting. Thank you for joining us. And as always, pleased to be joined by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Rob Krisman. Rob, good to see you today.
Good to see you in -10 Ohio.
Negative 10 Ohio. And this week, very pleased to be joined, special guest, the executive director of First Home IQ, a strategist and speaker on Millennial and Gen Z housing trends, the former VP of Sales and Strategy for Experience.com. It is our friend, Kristin Messerli. Kristin, good to see you, and thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you guys.
Oh, good stuff. And Rob, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Not a ton of news right now. We've obviously got the Fed meeting next week. A
Rich,
couple.
Rich, Rich. Not a ton of news. We had consumer prices yesterday, producer prices today. We had unemployment last Friday. What more do you want? Trump is making, all kinds of appointments. When you say there's not much news, I
It's,
beg to differ.
it's a good point. I know you get annoyed, with the constant, hand wringing over the rate environment and the Fed meeting. So maybe that was my angle for that. But yeah. So I mean, and rates are still in the high sixes. Any just I guess observations of the current climate, the change in administrations, what's coming into your inbox these days?
Well, as we've talked about on the show for Kristen's information, basically the election results impact capital markets, which includes Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and what might happen to them, as well as interest rates and what the tariffs might do to those, and also the regulatory environment with regard to the CFPB and other appointments and nominees uh, and so forth. And obviously, Donald Trump is trying to make a big impact. Rohit from the CFPB said he's not going to quit. He's going to stick it out until January 20th and see what happens. Um, but in terms of the interest rates, yeah, tariffs are inflationary. Somebody's got to pay for it. I'm sure everyone who voted for Donald Trump knew that going into this. But really, it'll be interesting to see if any of that gets gets walked back because the president, doesn't set mortgage rates, and he or she doesn't tell the Federal Reserve where interest rates should be uh, as policy. But the fact of the matter is the market is where the market is, Rich. And yeah, rates right now in the high sixes or low sevens, depending on the program and loan level price adjustments and so forth. It seems like we're going to be here for a while. I think the Federal Reserve will. I and plenty of other people think they will lower rates by a quarter next week. I think that's priced into the market already. So there may not be much change in mortgage rates. So we could be at these levels, into the new year.
95% chance, according to CME FedWatch, as of about half an hour ago, of a 25 basis point cut next week, 5% chance of no cut. So to your point, baked into the markets, won't stop the questions. If they do lower next week, we all get, why haven't rates gone down? The Fed's lowered, but so we'll see. The Fed's last rate meeting of the year, and yeah, 25 basis points does seem to be the case. And Kristin, we brought you on this week. Wanted to just, we go into a new year as the calendar flips, hope springs anew. And obviously, facing a pretty unprecedented housing affordability crisis here in America. I wanted to get your mindset on just your thoughts on the mindset of millennial and Gen Z prospective home buyers. I mean, certainly a lot of them on the sidelines, frustrated right now. I guess if you could just start by giving us some insight into what you're hearing and seeing just from the mindsets of young wannabe home buyers.
Yeah, I mean, the desire to become a homeowner has not dropped. Like people still, the Gen Zers I talk to and survey, millennials, they still want to be homeowners, but they feel that it is out of reach, and rightly so. I mean, I think the NAR released that the average age of the first-time home buyer is up to 38 this year, and that kind of dramatic rise is really, people feel it, and they feel that lack of confidence in their ability to buy, even if they can, even if they weren't actually priced out of the market. It creates a barrier telling them that, that they're not going to be able to buy, even if they start down that process. So I think there's this massive affordability crisis that is truly preventing people from going into, buying their first home. But then there's also another barrier in there that's just the message to first-time home buyers saying that, that this isn't possible for you. So there's the accessibility, but then there's the lack of education people have about what it takes to buy a home, and then the lack of trust they have for both themselves and in talking to professionals about, what it's going to take for them to be able to buy a home.
And, a big part of that is just education of young aspiring home buyers and First Home IQ, the nonprofit that you're the executive director of. I guess tell us a little bit about that as we get into the show here. Some of the progress, some of the things you're doing with that organization, and ultimately what the goal of First Home IQ is.
Yeah, so we started First Home IQ as it's a nonprofit that focuses on bringing financial literacy and homebuyer education, resources, and inspiration to the next generation. So we provide free resources to teachers and to students and homebuyers. They can access our online courses, and teachers have lesson plans and activities and things like that they can use to educate. And then we have an ambassador program for loan officers and industry professionals who want to reach first-time home buyers. And that funds our ability to provide those free resources. But yeah, as being part of that, we've educated over 1,000 students, like in classrooms. We've reached over 5,000 students overall through our online courses and things like that. And then we have over 100 ambassadors who are primarily loan officers that are wanting to reach first-time home buyers. And I think, our goal, we know we can't address all of the problems that exist in the market, but we can address the education crisis. And that is a part of the affordability challenge, is to help people, again, like even if it's a long-term plan, but to also understand what co-buying might look like, or other strategies, down payment, looking at down payment resource, down payment assistance programs, and other strategies to help people make a plan for home ownership. So that's why we've partnered with FinLocker to create, have more tools and resources for people to be able to make a longer term plan towards home ownership.
Do you have a goal in mind with the program?
Yeah. So,
and excuse Rich, Rich has a dog that, every time somebody knocks the dog tries to.
My French bulldog is being a raging a-hole today, and was he just hates the Amazon drivers and was just about to start creating chaos. I had to to remove him from the situation. Sorry.
It's like in their DNA. My dog also just freaks out over the mailman and Amazon drivers.
Kristen, you don't know Rich. Every dog that he's had, he trains them to like try to lunge through the front door at the delivery van.
Oh
And
man.
the delivery van shows up every day, right, with like baseball cards and football cards and so on. So the dogs, Rich's house has a reputation, and I know for a fact authorities have been brought in to assess the canine situation at the Serbinsky household. But
I
anyway, go
wish
on.
that was a joke. I wish that, yeah, we're all constantly having baseball cards delivered to the house. And especially my Frenchie just hates the delivery people. And we
Oh,
actually have a pending. He's bitten, I think, 4 delivery drivers in the
oh
last.
my gosh,
Yeah.
really?
So it's,
Oh no.
he's just the consummate ankle biter. But anyway, but yeah, so I had to get him apologies. I had to leave the feed there for a second.
No,
So,
that sounds important.
so
Anyway, a goal.
Cool. Yeah.
The reason why I ask is, I think that sometimes companies and governments get in trouble if they set a goal. Like an administration will come out and say, we want 100% home ownership kind of thing.
Mm.
Whereas
Yeah.
everybody in the industry knows we're not going to have 100% home ownership. Some people don't want to own a home, some people can't own a home, and so on. And some companies, I remember when Countrywide back in the day set some kind of home ownership goal or some kind of they wanted market share goal. They had a market share goal. It wasn't as if their policies and procedures would get them to a certain level. It's like, okay, we want 50% of the market or 25% of the market or whatever it was, and by hook or by crook, and didn't work out so well. That and other things. So I wanted to know what your goals were in terms of when you started thinking about this company, this nonprofit. What do you have in mind?
Yeah, so our ultimate goal has been to be educating 5 million Gen Z or the next generation on homeownership and financial literacy. But we don't have a specific goal around like homeownership rates or things like that. And I don't know, our tagline is own your future. Like if you want to be a homeowner, we want you to be able to have the education to get there or the plan to get there. But if that's not on your roadmap, that doesn't fit into your values and your plans, you don't need to do that, but I think our mission around that is just to be reaching, that many people. And then we had a goal of we keep decreasing our goal for the ambassadors. So we had a goal of 1,000 ambassadors this year. We're like not even, we're at like 150 or something. So we're reassessing what that goal is going to look like next year. But I do think if we can eventually get to 1,000 ambassadors, we're reaching a lot more people through each ambassador in their community. And that would feel very good in terms of like what kind of mentorship that looks like, what kind of access to trusted people that looks like. And then we haven't set a goal yet around schools and teachers, but I'd like to do that.
this is the big picture, and should note we're looking for a sponsor for the show, and the show's got a great following, 3 different mediums here live on Zoom, and then on podcast, and a couple different YouTube channels. So if you're interested in reaching a super hyper targeted audience, and also coverage in Rob's very popular industry newsletter and on charismacommentary.com, reach out to me at Rich at Onward Upward Consult. If you're interested in sponsoring the show. And this week, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Kristin Messerli. And Kristin, you've done more work than anybody I know, just with Gen Z, potential home buyers in general. What would you say to just Joe mortgage originator or Joe mortgage lender out there that wants to do a better job, attracting and kind of meeting the needs of that group as we head into the new calendar year?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I've surveyed over 7,000 Millennial and Gen Z home or consumers and home buyers, and we've found consistently, that again, the barriers around education, access, trust, and I think any strategy that you look at needs to come from the perspective of how do I build trust in my market, and so it doesn't have to be everything. Like we're constantly putting out other different strategies around emailing your database, or doing video on social media, or hosting live events. You don't need to do all of it, but I think looking at and deciding on, here's one thing I'm going to really focus on from the database marketing perspective. I think it's really helpful to I think, looking at, we had Tim Brahim on one of our masterminds recently, and he was talking about how to market to your past clients by doing an event for their kids. So like hosting something, saying, hey, I'm going to do a financial literacy series or a webinar, whatever, invite your kids. Because a lot of parents don't know how to educate their kids about buying a home. And that's a huge pool of people who can remember that you provide value and refer other people, and also maybe their kids, so there's that, thinking about strategies to market to your database. And then using video content, providing, I think looking at like video actually came up as the 73% of people said that they turn to video on social media to learn about home buying resources. And so there's a huge amount of people that go there, and it's a way to build trust, especially if you are personally, like doing the show. It's a way to get to know someone in a more intimate way than just putting a post out on social media. So, looking at that strategy. And then the last one, in terms of events, like don't just, I think it's great to host events and whatever, but look at ways to partner with someone in your community. Like maybe we had one of our ambassadors do an event with a local gym, where she partnered on like a health is wealth event. And that gym already had an audience, and they already trusted that gym owner. And then she's coming alongside it, and it's part of her community. So what are some other areas or partners that you're already involved with that you can build, like be creative around those partnerships? So those are a few ideas that we're really promoting with First Home IQ.
Kristin, I want to ask you, do you think that people's uh, people's focus, or people's thoughts when buying a home or searching for a hometown, have changed? And maybe this is an unfair question coming totally out of left field, but have changed over the last, say, 50 or 100 years. So the uh do you think, what is your opinion of people? Have they taken, have they looked more at, say, politics? Oh, I'm gonna go to this state or this area because of the politics, or because of climate change. I'm going to, I don't want to live in Las Vegas or Phoenix because of potential climate change, so I'm going to live somewhere else. Um, do you think people's focus has changed over the decades?
That is a fascinating question. First, I thought you were going to say like 5 years, and then you say 50 or 100. And looking at it from that perspective,
Well, I'm
I
thinking
think
of the average loan officer, is 88 years old. So they were giving loans during the Depression to somebody.
no, I think it's really interesting to take a bigger step back and say, like, okay, what's changed here? And I have heard, I don't know the data on this, so I'm going to look into this after this call, but I hear people talk about that all the time, of like that, oh, I don't want to move here because of climate change or whatever. But I think the reality is that most people are not making decisions based off of that. I mean, I think there's probably a small portion of the population that is truly thinking about it in that way. But I would say probably a lot bigger than 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we still were pretty close, close knit with our families, I think, or at least, 60, 70 years ago, we stayed close. And now it's a given for, most communities that you are, going to think about where your job is located, or where you want to, like for me, I moved to Los Angeles because of a community, like friendships that I'd made, and and it seemed like a fun place to be. And I think people are able to have that freedom to think a little bit more, about politics and climate change. And I certainly hear people talk about that, but I would like to know what the real numbers are around it. We are about to do our 2025 Next Gen Homebuyer Survey, so that might be something that I want to add to that.
Yeah, it just seems like there's so much. I mean, you have the affordability issue, obviously.
Yeah.
And so you've got that, but you also have these other things that are in the news. Like maybe I don't want to live, near this particular city or that city, or maybe I want to be near my family. But now it seems like there are there's just a lot being thrown at a potential home buyer to uh, in their considerations. And obviously the job situation has changed because more people are working from home. And
Mhm.
so, gee, I can live in, Moose Fur, Idaho, and work for a company that's headquartered in Pasadena. And so there's more of that goes on. So do I want to live in Moose Fur, Idaho, or do I want to live near Kristin Messerli because she's cool and she's got a great bunch of friends, or maybe I just want to go to Eastern Nevada, and someplace near federal lands, so I can own 5 or 10 acres and a 2 bedroom, 2 bath house.
Yeah.
It's people's flexibility and options, I think, are have continued to go up over the years. And I think that would be an interesting question to find out when people are thinking about owning a home, is your job location still number one? Or is it family? Or is it friends? Or is it, potential for catastrophes or climate change? Gee, I don't want to live in Oklahoma because I don't want to live in Tornado Alley. So I'm
Mhm.
going to move to northern Arizona because they don't have hurricanes and they don't have tornadoes and they don't have floods and they don't have earthquakes. You know, anyway,
Yeah.
just a thought.
We had an earthquake here while I was doing a webinar actually not too long ago, and I was like, why do I live here? Like suddenly it, kind of hit me that is this really, I don't know. There's just, but yeah, it's really interesting to think about the amount of choice that we have to with remote work and yeah. And I do hear a lot of times people talking about what those choices are and the freedom to, and the desire to live someplace depending on the laws and the politics too. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, went off topic there a little bit.
I love
You
it.
also
That's a good
do
question.
you do things for National MI, am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. We've these surveys for next gen homebuyer surveys that we've done. At this point, we've done seven or I think like 10 different ones since 2020, and National MI has sponsored all of those. And then they sponsor a lot of my speaking engagements as well since I think over 10 years at this point. So yeah, it's been a long-term partnership.
Go
Any
National MI.
I
any
know.
change, Kristen, just on what like because you cover a pretty broad set of really emerging topics in the industry. Any like recent changes and trends and what companies are having you speak about like in the last year?
Yeah, well, I think it's funny to think when I first started speaking in this industry, it was all about millennials, and just everyone was like so angry about millennials. I remember someone in an audience actually saying like millennials are monsters.
Yeah, they were painted
And
as idiots by the national media. I mean, for years. I remember that stage.
yeah, it was so yeah, it's funny to look back on that, but now we've passed that, and now I still speak a lot on the next gen home buyer, which includes Gen Z and millennials, and of course, because that average age of the first time home buyer has increased, it's still a big part of the topic. But I also speak a lot on distrust and more like that's kind of like psychology of money, how people are thinking and feeling as it relates to their home buying decisions. And then, of course, AI has come up a lot more recently. And so I've been talking a little bit more about what the future of housing as it relates to AI looks like, more on like an efficiency kind of productivity level. But yeah, it's still a similar topic, but it's just the content of what that means that's changed a bit.
And then along those lines, Kristin, technology and fintech solutions in the mortgage industry. Any thoughts you have on things that could emerge or be more viable, or trends that you're seeing in terms of demand from Gen Z prospective home buyers as more of them enter the market?
Yes, I was just interviewing a Gen Z student who specialized in, she's a grad student in user experience, basically. Anyway, she was talking about how important the like she was talking about, of course, we know that the demand for instant gratification and that kind of stuff, that's nothing new. But we want more personalization as consumers, and especially Gen Z is going to expect that. They don't trust information online the way that I think millennials did and previous generations did. Gen Z is the first generation who has completely grown up digital, and I think the amount of information that they have access to has really led to, in addition to a bunch of other factors, this distrust. And so, they're looking for personalization, definitely want to have an experience that's going to be, the technology should be good. They should have transparency every step of the way. If there's anything outside of that, it's really shocking, I think, for today's consumers. Even when I was going through the process and I tried out different experiences just a few years ago, it's shocking if you are not accustomed to the kind of, some of the analog stuff that you have to go through if you're not in a really high tech experience. So there's that. I think the personalization is a really big part of this. And then I would say, the they won't still want, and even maybe more so, want to have someone who they can trust to talk through their options. And so when we look at fintech solutions, it needs to be something that's going to also make the operation side and everything a lot more efficient, but then it's going to free up a loan officer to be able to have conversations, because they're not going to just trust the information. They want to be able to have real conversations with people. And then I mentioned AI, but of course that's going to become more of an important aspect to personalizing those borrower experiences, of course, in underwriting and fraud detection and things like that. But and then on the servicing side, I think we're seeing more of the servicing portfolio retention solutions that are, going to become more, again, providing like personalized offers and making that process a lot more efficient as well.
So as a follow-up question, or maybe to put a summary on what Rich just asked you, for the 78-year-old loan officers who are on this call, who think they're just as good as they ever were, when they are dealing with somebody who's 50 years younger than they are, 28-year-old potential home buyer, what are three pieces of concise three concise tips that you would give them to succeed in dealing with somebody who might be, let's just say, 30 or 40 or maybe 50 years younger?
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. So one would be being responsive. I think people expect a quick response, and even if you don't have the best technology, if you're able to text something saying, hey, I got your information, I got your inquiry or whatever, when can you meet? And just having that immediate response is going to save you a lot. Like, it's going to help you capture that lead, and also it's going to bring a sense of safety to that borrower. So I would say that's number one. Number two would be, I think you have to have like a rent versus own analysis, total cost analysis, something like that in the experience. I can't tell you what that meant to me. I felt it in my body when I got a rent versus own and my total cost analysis from Mortgage Coach, in the experience, because it showed me what, like, I was able to be empowered as a borrower to see for myself what clearly correct decision was for me, or get all the information. It provided that transparency. That meant more to me than any amount of information I could receive. And I think that's going to make a big difference. And then just clear communication. So these are not like high tech solutions other than, using your phone, but being clear around like, hey, this is what the process is going to look like. Here's what you can expect. I don't think it has to be a 10-day closing. That's great, but I think it needs to be clearly communicated so that people can, plan better and just stay up to date with what's going on with their loan. So what are your thoughts on that? Or what are both of your thoughts?
Well, I was going to especially, you bring up the rent to own comparison, and it doesn't have to be a, a complex anything. I was talking to a loan officer recently who was sitting down to a borrower, and the borrower was, in their late 20s or something, and they were renting. And the loan officer, all they did was simply say, well, what are you paying now in rent? And the person said, it's like $3,000 a month in rent. And so then the loan officer said, well, that's 36,000 a year. And let's look at 10 years. So that's $360,000 that you're going to pay in rent. Even if rent doesn't go up, you're going to pay that in rent, and you're going to have no wealth building of your own. Pay 360,000 in rent. And he said, the loan officer said to his borrower, let's look at what interest rates are now. And let's say we have a $400,000 house, and what is required to be put down and what your monthly payment is going to be like. And the appreciation the same appreciation that we would see over those 10 years. I mean, it doesn't have to be, like I say, it doesn't have to be some rocket science, really advanced spreadsheet with different colors and so forth. Sometimes it can just be a simple conversation that people can understand.
Mhm.
And I think that's very important, almost
Yeah.
regardless of the borrower's age.
Totally agree. And I do think if you can take it a step further with maybe a more complex spreadsheet or a tool or whatever, but like to incorporate for the borrower to understand if they're buying a condo, what the costs are around an HOA fees or things like that, that like a borrower is assuming that you're trying to get something from them or that you're trying to get by with something. And if you can show them, hey, there are some costs around home buying that you want to, make sure you think about, or here are where the fees come from, or something like that, like make that transparency makes the borrower feel like you're someone they can trust. And then other information comes a lot easier for them too, so yeah.
This is The Big Picture. I'm Rich Swerbinski with Onward and Upward Consulting. This week, we're really pleased to be joined by Kristin Messerli. Some good stuff in the chat and the Q&A. Our friend Ira Selwyn and Cardboard Jungle regular Ira Selwyn saying that don't forget it's dot plot release, the next Fed meeting next week as well, where they will release their dot plot. So yeah, important to point that out. And our resident climate expert, so your potential sponsors out there, what other shows have a resident climate risk expert? Kingsley Greenland with the question and a note about youth misperception of needing 20% down for a home, which Kristin answered in the chat, and Dana Gorgiou talking about maybe seeing reverse trends of climate, migration of population. People may be moving away from Florida or Sunbelt states to retire to be closer to kids and grandkids. And then Laura Schmidt, the SVP of Enterprise Risk for Rate, who we actually just booked. She's going to be on the show as our guest in February. So super, super excited to get Laura's take on just managing enterprise risk for one of the biggest mortgage lenders in America, with a comment just about, wanting to see the data on millennials, the survey that Kristin's about to rehash that you've done a few times before. Always great data. I've read that in the past, and yeah, we'll look forward to when you put that out, Kristin. Make sure to get that to us. We'd love to just incorporate some of that information into the show and have you back on, and more importantly, when it comes out. So, but good stuff there. Now, if anybody else has any questions for Kristin, yeah, drop them in the chat, the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left in the show.
You know,
So
Ira just went, I think, to a millennial hotspot destination vacation location, Iceland.
Iceland, okay.
Kristen, have you been to
It is.
Iceland yet?
No, but I have friends who have been, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, I think Ira had a good time. It's not the first time he's been there. So anyway,
Kristen,
all right,
give
we
me,
digress.
Dog just started freaking out at the Amazon delivery guy, so this is
But
Just
right now
crap.
that dog is surrounded by duct tape against the wall. All right.
I
So
just I just gave him like 14 melatonin chews, so he's actually snoring over in the corner. So hopefully he can hear it. So, um, Kristen, changing our attention, the affordable housing crisis in America. Any innovative solution, anything off the radar outside of what all the rest of us are talking about in terms of Rob? Your hand is up.
can we rephrase crisis?
I'd say it's a crisis. I know you like to
Really?
Yeah,
downplay it.
why do you not say it's a crisis?
Yeah. So you don't feel it.
See, I, I, I'm pretty careful about my words, and when I hear crisis, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's like
Mhm,
there's nuclear weapons like
mhm,
in Cuba pointing at the United States. That's
mhm,
like a crisis, or a famine in,
mhm,
Somalia, or whatever it is. When you talk about crisis, I think it's a higher level than what we're seeing now. And yeah, there's an affordability problem. There's a big affordability issue, but I still see for sale signs. And a lot of people, I would say that, like it or not, even if they're in their parents' basement or renting a place, I would say that most of the people who need a place to live have a place somehow. And yeah, I do see homeless encampments. So maybe there's more of a homeless crisis. But when you talk about housing crisis, houses are still being built. There are places for sale. I just wouldn't escalate it up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, North Korea, Japan kind of crisis level. I just, the homeability issue, the home problem. I don't know. I just have an issue with the word crisis.
Kristen, you're closer to it than us old
Yeah,
guys.
totally,
Is it a crisis?
totally fair point around, but I think the health and safety risk and I think it's a real crisis when it drops all the way down. If you're talking about like, oh, I wish I could own a home, but instead I'm renting, we're cool. That's not, yeah, I would say that's not a crisis, but it filters all the way down, and there is chronic homelessness. I see it every day. And I do think that's a huge challenge. And the fact that housing costs have increased so far beyond wages, it creates a problem for people that I think does hit those base level, safety and health concerns. So anyway, that I can see that perspective, but it
Okay,
feels pretty, yeah.
fair enough. I'll continue to use crisis in very sparing terms.
I mean, if a couple like just out of college, both making 60, 70,000, like you can't buy a house in America, right? I know, maybe they're, like where I live in Ohio, there's like nothing. I mean, zero, like under like 400K. And and that it is tough. I mean, crisis might maybe too strong a word, but
And what it trickles down to is like I bought a place in a tenancy in common, so it's like a condo building, and there's 2 units in here who are still renting, and they're trying to get removed, and so that buyers like me can afford to live in afford to buy a place. And of course, what's going to happen to them? I mean, I think they're not going to be able to rent a place at the rate that they have now, and I'm worried about that's where it trickles down. So yeah, I think it's but yeah, so in terms of like thinking about what kind of innovative I still think that this is not innovative, so I'm just going to say it first, but someone mentioned the down payment, like people still 70% of our survey said that they thought you could put 10 or 20% down to buy a home. So the fact that there's so many people who just don't have that information. And then secondly, the down payment assistance programs that are available still completely, I think there's a lack of education around what those are. There's not enough of them, of course. But when we start talking about innovative stuff, I think we're looking at shared equity programs, co-buying. I think that's really interesting and something that can help people get into homes faster, buy homes faster. And that information, I think, could be better shared as well. So,
Kristin,
I think, sorry, Rich, so going back to my crisis comment. Yeah, some weeks ago I was with a buddy, and he took his shoes off and he had a hole in one of his socks. I'm like, dude, what's with the hole in your sock? He goes, I'm having a sock crisis. And I thought, you know what? It's not a sock crisis. You could go buy a pair of socks. Go buy a bunch of socks. They're not that expensive, and there's nothing like putting on a brand new pair of socks. So it's not really a sock crisis. I'm telling him this. And I think that there are, if we were really in a crisis situation, like in my commentary, I put forth things about, manufactured housing, 3D printing, using, converting offices to residences. I mean, I think that if we were having a real crisis, that the industry and the nation would avail itself to more of those. So there are solutions out there. But if you try to get the agencies, up and running on a manufactured home or a 3D printed house, it can be very difficult for some reason. I'm just saying, if there was really a crisis and those powers that be wanted to help solve it, they would be more open to shifting their underwriting guidelines, for example, to look more at, utility bills or rent bills or whatever that might be, or looking at alternative construction, or looking at ADUs. Like in California now, we can build an ADU. I think that we would be doing more than kind of just wallowing around. All right, I'll get off my soapbox.
do you think that can't there be a crisis and still not a drive to solve for that crisis? Because I mean, is it really lucrative enough for them to, build more
No,
affordable housing?
right. Clearly not. Right. I mean, builders, this is the example that I use when I talk to groups. I say, if the 10-acre parcel comes available, 40 minutes out of town, and you throw a bunch of builders at it and say, hey, what do you want? What are you going to do here? Probably, 9 times out of 10, those builders will build 10 1-acre ranchettes rather than some kind of affordable housing complex. And even if the affordable housing complex made economic sense based on the permit costs and the utility hookup costs in that area, the neighbors might not want it. They don't want to
Right.
see, three bedroom thing. Um, uh, you know, it is a problem. I mean, it's a problem everywhere. I just have an issue with the term, crisis. Anyway, I'll stand down.
Krista, one follow-up for me is, going back to talking about the millennial, rage and all the talk about millennials and,
They're monsters. They're monsters, I
monstrous,
tell you.
obsessive, and but and I think that the millennials had very negative connotations to the mortgage industry, because of the mortgage meltdown of 07, 08. Their parents were afflicted, they had ties to it. There was a lot of distrust and negative connotations with the mortgage lending industry with the millennial group. Gen Z, does that still exist? What is Gen Z's like? I get that this is just such a broad-based question, but their general perception with like the mortgage lending community and industry.
Yeah, it's like they're not saying the same thing. They're not when you drill into why do you not trust the mortgage industry, it's not they're not specifically quoting the crisis, and or citing the crisis. So I think that is interesting, but Gen Z is less trusting than millennials. In our survey data, we've asked, and millennials are significantly less trusting of mortgage professionals or real estate professionals. But I don't think it's just this industry. When I first saw, there was a data point that came in 2021 where we saw 2 in 3 millennials and Gen Z said they didn't think lenders were trustworthy or reliable. And I was like, what is going on? It's, got to be from the financial crisis. But then I started looking at other industries, and we're less trusting of media, healthcare, across the board. Like every industry you can think of, there's less trust. And I think it has part to do with the access to information and also, what we know about now. I mean, there's just trust has dropped across the country and across industries. And so I think that's where, the assumption needs to be when you're reaching, especially the next generation, is that trust is starting from zero, and part of your job is to build that trust. So that means that's why video content is helpful, and having that, or why having events and things like that are helpful, and referrals are so important. But even Gen Zers will tell me that they are not going to trust the information they see online, even if it's from a financial influencer that they follow. That's one data point for them, but it's not like, oh, I trust this. But they do want to have a referral from someone so that they can talk it through and build trust with someone, an individual.
Great points, yeah, and great insight. And a couple people echo in chat the same thing. It's just so much more information readily available to people on everything going on right now. But well, as always, the time flies by. But Kristin, this was great. Really, really enjoyed having you on and providing your insight on these really critical issues facing the housing market. And yeah, really, really appreciate you joining us this week.
Great. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to check out First Home IQ and the education resources we have there, we have a lot of free resources there. You can go to firsthomeiq.com.
firsthomeiq.com if you're listening on the pod or our YouTube channel. And also, we're looking for sponsors for the show. 3 different mediums: the live, the podcast, the YouTube, really hyper-targeted audience. If you want to reach this great mortgage lending community, reach out to me at Rich and Onward Upward Consult, or go to chrismancommentary.com, and you can get more info about being featured on the show, in Rob's newsletter, and in a bunch of different ways to put your brand and your company in front of the people. So, well, good stuff.
Kristen's so much more adept at typing things while we're on here. If I try to type something, it would be like this. You'd see my fingers going up and down.
Smoke coming out of your ears, right?
I
Yeah.
try to do it really in sleuth mode.
And if you're listening on the pod of YouTube, we do this show live. We get a nice live audience, as you hear each week, pretty chat interactive. So check out our live version, 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays, and then it goes to pod and YouTube right after that. You can go to chrismancommentary.com to get registered for that. Thanks for all the nice comments in the chat, and most importantly, thank you for taking some time out of your Thursday to join us. But Rob, as always, good to see you.
Yeah, see you too. Home stretch toward Christmas time.
Toward Christmas, yes, exactly. And Kristin, thanks again for joining us. And it was great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you both. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great rest of your week and weekend, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday at 3 Eastern. Take care.